you've already started it? Got it. Okay. All right. Weird. Okay. So yes, we are so thankful to Jewish Family Services for recognizing this need for this community of newly arrived Afghans and for organizing this series. We're coming to the end of 7 presentations and follow-ups. So we've had we've really touched on a lot of different topics that were relevant to the needs of this community. And in general, our approach is to present things about the country, about the geography, the ethnicities, a little bit of the history, the religions, and also the family structures, the gender dynamics, basic health and hygiene practices, and of course, today to focus on health-related issues. Our presentation usually takes 40 some odd minutes, so it takes most of the time we have today. And you are welcome to put your comments and questions into the chat, although we will have a few minutes at the end that we'll open up for discussion. And then we meet again in a week. We have a follow-up session so that anything that comes up that we didn't touch on or that comes up between now and then, please bear in mind that you can come back with questions and we can address them in a longer conversation. So we also apologize because we have to speak in very general terms about the culture, the religion, languages, the ethnic practices, the socio and economic structures, even though, of course, like any society, it's very varied, but we can't do an introduction without general. So we apologize up front. We also like to say that the images we use, we're very attentive to the sensitivities that Afghans have about images, particularly of women. And so we're very careful with that. We use our own images for the most part. We've used a few images by this wonderful Afghan photographer named Fatemi. I'm going to let Zala introduce herself because she's so interesting. And then I'll introduce myself and then go.
No.
And we should ask everyone to mute themselves. Please, Zala.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Masara, and thank you, everyone, for having the time and interest to learn about Afghanistan and Afghan culture, which will definitely help the Afghans who recently evacuated from Afghanistan. I'm Zala, and I live in Virginia. I'm from Afghanistan, a province in the west of Afghanistan. I lived my life as a refugee, probably since I was born. Like at age 2, we left Afghanistan, my family, during the Russian invasion. We went to Iran, and then for a few years, I was a kid, I don't remember even, and then mostly I lived in Pakistan, and then came to Kabul in 2008, but then came to US in 2010 on a Fulbright scholarship to have my master's in international economics and finance. I also have my degree in social development studies. And my work experience for the last 12 to 15 years, I have worked in international development with a focus on girls' education and women economic development on projects in Afghanistan, of course. I am the co-founder of a nonprofit and also a social enterprise that's still active in Afghanistan. It creates jobs for women, and we produce reusable sanitary pads, which is for the domestic use, but also it's produced in Afghanistan. And we also support girls' education in Afghanistan right now, the girls who go to university. And I also worked, I would say, 2 months at Fort Dix, which really was a good experience, first-hand experience working with Afghans evacuees. It was a good mix of like both rural and urban evacuees and understanding better their problems and challenges and struggle to survive or kind of to get used to the lifestyle in US. So I worked there also for 2 months, and yeah, I'll be happy to answer any question you have and provide more information on Afghanistan. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Zala. I'd like to add that Zala and I have been research associates at the University of Colorado Boulder for a number of years, working on projects about women's leadership and authority at multiple scales, from the home to the top of the government in Afghanistan. So we've collaborated on numerous projects at this point in our lives. I'm Rachel, and I've been involved in and around Afghanistan for my entire academic career, which seems to be long. And I took up Persian when I was in college as an undergraduate because it fit in my schedule and because I liked the pretty alphabet it had. And when you're 20 years old, you make those kinds of decisions. You never know where they're going to take you. So Persian is spoken in Iran, which I didn't even know when I started. It's spoken in Afghanistan, a dialect called Dari. It's spoken in Tajikistan, called Tajik. And I've spent my career in all of those places. I ended up pursuing a PhD in linguistics at University of Chicago, writing about a minority language in Afghanistan that is spoken in the Eastern Valleys. And I've spent a lot of time with that community of speakers. Language is called Pashai. And I've helped the women in that community start an NGO called Rubia that did, I should say, embroidery and heritage crafts to earn income for the community. And it was quite successful for a long time. I was a Fulbrighter in Soviet Tajikistan back in the day, and was actually a Fulbright scholar again in Norway, studying Afghan issues a few years ago. I have also, particularly during the Obama years, the mid-2000s, when there was a civilian surge in Afghanistan, I did quite a bit of training for USAID, for the State Department, for the military in culture before their deployments. And so, as you can see, I have quite a varied background, often with one foot in Afghanistan and the other in the US. And I have to always say up front that I've made a lot of cultural mistakes. I've probably done almost all of them. And Afghans have always been gracious enough and kind enough to direct me in the right direction. And I have always appreciated that. So without further ado, let's learn something about the country of Afghanistan and the cultures. Let's see if I can advance my slides. That would help. As a linguist, I have a great interest in language, of course, and Afghans are tremendously appreciative of foreigners. We hear foreigners to them using some of their expressions. And this is a generic Islamic expression of Assalamu alaikum, which is a greeting, peace be upon you. And the response is just to switch the words around and say wa alaikum assalam, on you peace. And it's very much appreciated in the Afghan community if you even try to use a few words. Afghanistan is a country that sits at the crossroads of major ancient cultures between East and West, at the heart of the Silk Road. It's often defined more by where it isn't than where it is. Afghanistan is not part of the Middle East. It's not part of South Asia. It's not part of Central Asia. It's kind of bits and pieces of all of those things. The population of Afghanistan is about 37.5 million, and the capital city, Kabul, is 4.5 million. Afghanistan forever confounds its guests, its invaders, and it's those who attempt to occupy it, I should say. It is the home of Rumi, the poet, the game of polo, and backgammon. It's often described as rough and rugged and unconquerable, and it's also breathtakingly beautiful. The cultures of Afghanistan have been influenced over the years by the Buddhist monks who traveled through from the east, the raiding hordes of Turkic tribes from the north, and as well as the indigenous Indo-European and Indo-Aryan cultures. And of course, Islam, which has profoundly and repeatedly continued to transform Afghanistan. It's a landlocked country, and there's scant water. All the rivers run through it. So they run in from usually from Iran area and out through Pakistan. And so there's a lot of issues around water in Afghanistan, never enough. The Hindu Kush mountains that you can see, sort of foothills to the Himalaya, divide the country from northeast to southwest. There's a desert in the south and a steppe area in the north. And many of the recent arrivals here have come from that region in the southeastern part of the country. The climate is arid, and it's rarely below 20 degrees. So in the summer, it can be hot and humid in the east, but Kabul, which is set at about 6,000 feet, is quite dry, even in the summer, is not quite so hot, even in the summer. More than 70% of Afghanistan. So most of the people are subsistence farmers, and it takes the work of many family members to make ends meet. Drought has been a persistent problem for years, and there is far more arable land than there is water to cultivate. Water rights and land ownership are continuous sources of tension and conflict in Afghanistan. They have a saying that Kabul can be without gold, but it cannot be without snow, because of course snow bodes well for the upcoming agricultural season. Nevertheless, the Northeast winter is harsher than what the Afghan quite a bit in Kabul. Child labor is common. Children mainly work in the mechanic shops and convenience stores. In the rural areas, they do agricultural work. But in general, quite a few tasks are given to children at a young age. So if they're not working, they're looking after younger siblings, they're preparing food, gathering fuel, going out running errands alone, things like that. Let me just give you a quick bit of history. Afghanistan was never colonized by the British, so it was not part of India, Pakistan. There were 3 wars that the British fought in their attempts to conquer Afghanistan, and they lost them all, and this continues to be a point of pride among Afghans. The borders were determined during the late 19th century when the Russian Empire and the British colonial powers were vying for territory, influence, wealth, and resources in what was known as the Great Game. Afghanistan was conquered by neither, but its borders were defined through treaties as a buffer zone between those 2 imperial powers. Political conflict in the 1970s led to the Soviet invasion in 1979, which drove over 3 million Afghans as refugees into Pakistan and gave rise to numerous Mujahideen factions that were funded by the US government. And this US proxy war ended with the Soviet withdrawal in 1989. And of course, the US interest in Afghanistan evaporated at that time. A civil, bloody, and destructive civil war raged among the Mujahideen factions until 1996, when the Islamic movement, the Taliban, I should say, the Taliban movement rose in response. Their Islamic emirate came out of the Islamic schools, the madrasas, that were educating young Afghan boys in Pakistan. They put an end to the civil war, but they created a pariah state, plunging the country deeper into poverty and isolation. This ostensibly ended with the US invasion in October 2001. So trauma has been a big part of all Afghans' lives. The country's been in conflict for 45 years, and the impacts are present in all aspects of life, from loss of relatives to continuous displacement, to disrupted social structures, to disrupted abilities to plan, think, and organize themselves personally. There are multiple ethno-linguistic groups, tribes, languages, and tribally and non-tribally organized people in Afghanistan. And so even if you just look at the colors, you see that there's quite a few. The dominant group are the Pashtuns, and as you can see, they're dominating in the southern part of the country, but they're found all over. And there are plenty of them in Pakistan. So for each of these colors, you see them over the border. It shows you where the influences can come from outside the country, which is very important. Afghanistan tends to get squeezed from all these influences. The Pashtuns are, of course, known for being the central tribe of the Taliban, but also the monarchs of Afghanistan and the presidents have come from the Pashtun group. They speak the language called Pashto. They're mostly Sunni Muslim. The next population in size are the Dari speaking group. The Dari, they're called Tajik or Persian or Farsi. They're all dialects related. They also live throughout the country, and they are mostly Sunni Muslim as well. The exception to this group are the Hazara. They make up about 9% of the population. You see that purple in the center around an area called Bamiyan. They speak also a dialect of Persian called Hazaragi. They have been the most marginalized group politically and socially. They mostly practice Shia Islam, and because of that, they've been persecuted by Pashtun governments, warlords, and of course under the Taliban with massive genocide incidents. Many fled to Iran during the past 40 years of conflict. Here in the north, you'll see that there's Uzbek and Turkmen and Kyrgyz, which are all Turkic-related tribal groups, and Baluch in the south, and in the east is Nuristani and the Pashai speakers that around near Jalalabad, that is the community of my affinity in Afghanistan. So of course, over the years, there are many rivalries between these groups as they've competed over land and resources and powers, and it's contributed to multiple cycles of conflict and dissonance. It's also the case that prejudices and rivalries between families, tribes, and ethnicities are not left behind in Afghanistan. They bring them to the diaspora with them often. Just a small point of clarification. One is an Afghan and one is an Afghani. Afghani is the currency. The people are called Afghan, or some people prefer to be called Afghanistani. Afghan society is steeped in Islam, and it is a central organizing principle for most Afghans' lives. The one thing that is common to all Afghans is their commitment to Islam as both a belief system and as a social program. The idea being that a unity of belief is linked to collective well-being and resulting in a proper social order. Islam brings a strong sense of morality. Sunni Muslims make up about 90% of the population, and Shia Muslims are 10%. But both Sunni and Shia follow the religious texts of the Quran and the Hadith, that is the words and actions of the Prophet, and the 5 pillars of Islam: prayer, charity, the fasting for the month of Ramadan, the Hajj, that is the pilgrimage to Mecca, and the declaration of Shahada, which is the profession of faith. The virgin birth of Jesus is upheld in Islam, and Jesus is considered the penultimate prophet of Islam. He's mentioned throughout the Quran, as is Mary or Maryam, who's quite revered. So Islam pervades all aspects of life, the sayings, people quote the Quran, they quote the sayings of the Prophet, they tell stories. The clothing that people wear is Islamically informed. It's meant to be modest and loose-fitting in general. And it also informs what is halal, that is what is permissible from marriage partners to foods, and what is haram, that which is not permissible, such as the foods, pork, and alcohol are forbidden, and many other aspects of social interaction are dictated by Islam. So Afghans are particularly concerned that medical practitioners here do not have their best interests in mind. Because they feel, because they are Muslims and because they are refugees, they don't think that people really care as much about them. They're quite concerned that there might be some non-permissible ingredient in the medicine that they're given. And in fact, many Afghans get medications brought to them from Afghanistan or sent from Pakistan or India, where regulation is much weaker, but those are the medications that they trust. And trust is a huge issue, and we'll come back to it several times during this presentation. So many people self-prescribe pain medications and may be dependent on them, but they wouldn't consider that an addiction. Some are even concerned that hospital food is not halal, and they will bring in their own food to the hospital, have their relatives bring food. The Islamic calendar is lunar, and actually, someone has their, is everybody muted? Because otherwise I only hear an echo. Okay. The Islamic calendar is lunar. There's also a solar calendar in Afghanistan, which can be quite complicated at times, but the dates don't line up with our calendar. But this year, Ramadan began at the beginning of April and it ended at the beginning of May. It's a month of spiritual reflection and fasting from sunup to sundown. People often get up early before the sun, they have a meal together, and then they don't take water or food till the evening break. It's a very celebratory time. But since fasting is so important at this time, people will avoid taking medication and refuse medical tests or to give blood if they need to, because they don't want to break their fast. Even pregnant women will fast to the detriment of their health. And Islam does not permit people who are physically weakened or compromised to fast. But nevertheless, this is the common social practice And women would be ashamed if people found out they were not fasting, so they will even fast when their bodies really shouldn't be fasting. Ramadan ends with Eid, and the Eid of breaking the fast, and it's a celebratory time. Gifts are given, mostly sweets and candies. And of course, there are other holidays in the Islamic calendar, but since none are coming upon us right now, I thought I would just focus on those two. In addition, birthdays are not customarily celebrated. In fact, until recently, and still in many cases, births are not recorded. They're not written down and officially in any way, and Afghans often estimate their age and choose their own birthdays, so that you might find that January 1st is a very popular birthday, and May 21st, which, not May 21st, March 21st, which is the Persian New Year, Nowruz, are also very popular birthdays for Afghans. So there are other core concepts that I wanted to touch on, which are honor, family, gender roles. So Afghan communities, particularly in the villages and the rural regions, tend to be self-governing. There've never been much reach of the government into the rural regions. People see the government as corrupt, rapacious, unreliable, and unavailable. So suspicion runs particularly high of government representation and authorities. Afghans prefer to avoid authorities and manage their affairs themselves. This often extends to medical personnel and Western medicine structures and practices as well. So developing trust and positive relationships to government representatives and all kinds of figures of authority will take time and will take some investment. So there's numerous structural differences between the way medicine is practiced in Afghanistan and here. There's almost no preventative care in Afghanistan. Medicine is basically problem-oriented. If you're in pain or distress, you go to a doctor or clinic and you're seen without an appointment and usually given medicine and at the very least vitamins, and records are not kept. Much social behavior in Afghanistan is influenced by the Afghans' acute awareness of their personal honor. And honor refers to a person's reputation, their prestige, how they're seen by their community. Person's reputation precedes them in all things. And so I always like to think of it like a wheelbarrow. So generations of a family might be riding up front in the wheelbarrow with their honor, their piety, their wealth, largesse, and humility. And an individual is responsible for all of that when he or she goes out into the world. And of course, a wheelbarrow is not stable. It only has that one wheel in front, and it's very easy to knock over that cart. And if you do something that might be perceived as not good behavior, you will be destroying the reputation of all those who preceded you and all those who will follow. So people's personal behavior is reflective of their families. And people are scrupulous about maintaining their dignity and their honor as they go out into the world. And the preservation of honor and the concern about community opinion is often the foremost thing in people's minds, and it cannot be overstated. This is probably the thing that matters most. And it influences how people behave. It keeps them very conservative in many ways in accordance with social expectations, to avoid attention to themselves, to risk doing something that's dishonorable. And of course, it puts a great deal of pressure on people who might feel like they want to push the social boundaries a little bit or a lot. The senior male member of a family is responsible to protect the honor and well-being of the family, particularly as it concerns the behavior of women around dress and social interactions, education, work, and public presence. And it can be seen as a loss of honor if the father, the brother, the husband, to the father or the husband or the brother, if a woman does not comply with these expectations. So it can be a source of great distress in the families, and it can also lead to violence at times. With respect to the family, the core concepts that are in play are public versus private. So private is both physical and social. And family matters are part of that private sphere.
I am in a seminar. Oh, wait a minute.
Can you mute? Okay. So an Afghan home.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
Nope. Got to mute.
I just muted you. You're good, team.
So I'm good, right?
You're good, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. So as you can see, the Afghan homes are surrounded by a fortress, like it's like a fortress, and the word for it is a fortress. And there are no windows to the outside. All the social space is on the inside. There's multiple generations will live there. Maybe a nuclear family has 1 or 2 rooms to themselves. The families tend to sleep together in one room. There's precious little sense of privacy or private space in an Afghan household. By the same token, social isolation, like time out even, could be considered severe punishment and kind of cruel. With respect to privacy, women often refuse to be seen by a male medical practitioner. Female medical practitioners are not always available, but they may refuse certain tests or x-rays or have their be asked to lift your shirt and be examined by a doctor. They're so concerned about their modesty and privacy that they would rather suffer sometimes, even if their husbands are there and say it's okay. It just goes so much against the grain for them. In fact, in rural Afghanistan, which is where most of my experience resides, there are no female doctors, and often the men in the households will go to the doctor on behalf of the female, describe her complaints, and return with medication. So that's more typical than letting her be seen or even talk to a doctor. In urban areas, space is limited, and people live in small compounds, and many people live in really nice, beautiful apartment blocks as well. So people in urban settings have access to more medical options, but it's still problem oriented and not prevention oriented. Here they use because in Afghanistan, they just walk into a clinic and they expect to get medicine for everything. A doctor that does not prescribe is not a good doctor. They don't know what they're doing. And there's a strong feeling among the Afghans here really don't know what they're doing. They use the ER. They'll go for everything from dental pain to abdominal distress. They often leave without their discharge papers or instructions, or even if they get instructions, they may not be able to or understand how important it is to follow up. And they often will reject Iranian Persian interpreters or Pakistani Pashto interpreters, even if that's all the hospital has to offer them, because it's not their own people. That private sphere is women's sphere. That is the home, and women are in charge of all the domestic chores, the cooking, the cleaning, raising children, preparing food for guests. Guests are very important in Afghanistan. And in large families, childcare is passed down the line to the older children. There's household chores, keeping order, are definitely part of the daughter's roles and responsibilities. And in general, gender roles are clearly defined. Women dominate the domestic sphere and they wield authority over other women and children. And this is also true in the diaspora as well as in Afghanistan. Laundry is done by hand and women prefer to do it themselves at home. It's a point of privacy and pride to do their family's laundry and the laundry of their guests. So people don't like laundromats very much. And I keep encouraging people, if you want to make a nice gift to an Afghan household, buy them a small portable washing machine that they can just hook up to a sink. Afghans don't typically change their clothes very often. In Afghanistan, nobody wears pajamas to go to sleep. They sleep in their clothes. Personal hygiene comes at a high price. In Afghanistan, where water is scarce and heating it requires precious fuel. So personal hygiene is not seen as that important, and the hygiene of children is not seen as that important, and deodorant is not customarily used as either. As you can see, conditions differ greatly in urban settings. And of course, here come from both urban and rural backgrounds. I have much more expertise in rural backgrounds. And as you can see, Zala sitting there at the end of the table in blue is very much an urban Kabuli herself. So much of the housework still falls on the girls in urban settings, although there's much less manual labor and girls have more opportunities to attend schools in urban settings. Babies are typically swaddled like this for most of the first year of their life. So you can see that like something, coal is rubbed into their, it's not charcoal, it's called surma or kohl, K-O-H-L. It's a black powder. It's rubbed into the baby's eyes. People say it makes them look more attractive. Some people think it's good for them. Some people think it's not good for them. People here, I should say. But Afghan women are valued by the number of sons they produce, and Afghan families, in particular rural ones, tend to be quite large, 6 to 10, 12 children. Most women in the countryside have given birth alone, rarely in hospitals, rarely with midwives, and maternal and infant mortality can be quite high in some parts of Afghanistan. So few women have had access to prenatal care in Afghanistan. Many have experienced it for the first time on military bases when they came here. And there are numerous superstitious practices around babies and children. So the people feel like the tighter you swaddle the baby, the taller he will be, or there's some issues around the swaddling because some medical practitioners are concerned that the baby might choke because they're using a sash and not a blanket to swaddle them. And so that's an area of contention to some extent. Some Afghans put lemon under the arms of babies. That superstition I haven't figured out yet. And I know from experience that not all women will nurse the babies when they're first born. The colostrum they actually think is bad for the babies. And so they'll give them fennel water instead. So they don't always get off to a good start, or as good a start as you would like to see. Public space is men's space for the most part, and they're responsible for the family's economic well-being. So all males in the household, if they can, work to support this group. And women may earn income through home-based work, such as embroidery or tailoring or some food preparation in the countryside. And in the urban areas, women have more opportunities to work outside the home, and it's particularly for educated women, which tends to be more in the rural, much more in the urban areas. There are some households where women are the sole earners. And for the project that Zala described, her enterprise called Safe Path, it is women who are the sole earners, who are the employees at that company. And if it were not for their ability to work in that company, they would be in very, very difficult straits. So even during this Taliban time, they're able to hold on to their jobs. Family structure is traditional, patriarchal. Most of the decisions are taken up by fathers or husbands. Of course, this is in flux among the more educated, more urbanized people. There's maybe a little, maybe it's a little more equal, but still it's in the countryside, it's man's world. And many of the rural Afghans I know who've emigrated to the US or the European diaspora, they follow this pattern as best they can. So women are expected to stay home, and it could take years of resettlement before women can learn local languages, to have an opportunity to work, or ever learn how to drive. It can take a very long time. Pastimes among Afghans are mostly very social, such as visiting friends and families, and they tell stories, and gossip is very important, and information travels really fast. Dried fruits and nuts served with green tea and cardamom are at the least what is going to be served. This is actually a lovely spread here, and but as the most minimal gesture is green tea and a sweet, and accepting or offering tea is proper etiquette. So of course you should never refuse if you're offered, or you don't have to drink it, but you should accept it. You don't want to insult anybody. Pets are usually birds of some kind. Afghans do not keep house pets for the most part, like dogs or cats. Dogs are considered particularly dirty. So since multiple family members are active in the raising of children in Afghanistan, if a child is sick, anyone might be the one who takes them to the doctor. Of course, here you need it to be a legal guardian or someone who's a designated person, but Afghans don't understand that. They're just like, if somebody can take them, especially if they can speak English, it doesn't necessarily have to be a relative, they should take them to the doctor. So sometimes that's problematic for children to be seen. It's also can be problematic in terms of communicating information and follow-up and things like that. Parents don't keep track of the dates of surgeries or immunizations or previous health history, not only from of themselves, but of their children as well. If they have some kind of printout of records that they're given, they often, they don't preserve them as something precious and worth holding on to or important. They'll get scribbled on, they'll get crumpled, they'll get torn. So it's hard for them to keep track of those kinds of materials. But children show great deference and are very respectful of their elders. It's impressive. When they grow up, they expect their parents to have the wisdom and know what's best for them. And they trust their parents to make important decisions for them. And this extends often to marriage partners. So most marriages are arranged by parents, but not all. Arranging marriages, celebrations of engagements, and entertaining guests are hugely important to Afghans. In some cases, the parents engage their babies to each other to solidify bonds, sometimes before they're born even, but often right after they're born. In other cases, individuals find their own mates in love marriages, particularly those who are educated might meet each other in university. First cousin marriage is quite common in Afghanistan, as well as second cousin, third cousin, and whatever, but first cousin is one of the preferred marriages. There's a considerable range of attitudes among Afghans toward education. In rural areas, there's widespread reserve about education, in particular because it comes from the government and the government is suspect. So that all gets rolled into one thing, in particular for girls. So education can be quite limited and low by comparison to the US. And lack of literacy is commonplace and it's not shameful. And many of the rural people who've come here, neither the father nor the mother have been educated and they are non-literate. So lack of literacy makes it especially hard to keep track of documents or appointments or test results. And all of these kinds of files are kind of the basis of our society. So it can be quite challenging. And for children who have trouble in school, learning problems, other issues, those can kind of get swept under the rug and just ignored, and people don't think there's treatment for a lot of things that are not obvious to them. Schools are, for the most part, gender segregated. So when students are attending school here, it's a little bit challenging as well because they're not used to having gender mixed socialization or learning or whatever. And the parents in Afghanistan and here are not typically involved in their children's education. Although teachers are very highly respected, teachers and doctors, very highly respected, but corporal punishment is used in Afghanistan. If a teacher hits a student, it's because the parents are fine, that's what the teacher knows best. And, physical violence within the household can be quite common as well. In larger families, parents really don't attend that closely to their children's needs. They allow them to play unsupervised outdoors. They allow them to wander as they would in Afghanistan. There is no bedtime. Kids are often left to play on iPhones for hours. That's nothing's wrong with that from the Afghan perspective. While some changes have happened over the past 20 years of US and coalition involvement in Afghanistan, those changes apply much less to the rural areas, and that's where the evacuees are from. So during the previous Taliban regime of 1996 to 2001, women and girls were subjected to strict dress codes, excluded from work outside the home, denied access to education and healthcare, and had limited mobility. But it's worth remembering that how conservative Afghan society is, and that women and girls have often been limited. And the goal is for women not to be seen outside the home by men outside the home. And Afghan women are typically accompanied by a mahram, a male escort. And so women should often not alone, but have somebody, it could even be a son who would count as a male escort for them. Socialization, which I've hinted at a few times, is outside the family tends to be gender segregated. So men socialize with men and women with women. Of course, not across the board. In formal settings of educated people, there might be some mixed socialization, but in general not. Men hold hands with men, It's a sign of friendship. Women are affectionate with women. And so in general, cross-gender touching is looked down upon. If you should never be alone in a room with someone with the door closed, especially if it's cross-gender, because people are going to wonder what happened in there and nobody can be sure. So communication is quite different in general from the way, the strategy of communication from the way we in Afghanistan or among Afghans and the way we communicate here. Some things need to be said and some things need to be understood. So in Afghanistan, things need to be understood. That's the mode of communication. In the US, things need to be said. That's our mode of communication. So we rely on explicit forms of communication, less on implication. We are direct, or that's how we see ourselves. Of course, not always. And we're not that good at reading non-expressions. By contrast, in Afghanistan, which is considered a high context society, meaning is embedded in sociocultural context, and much is communicated implicitly. The focus is on what is understood, not so much what is said, and the style is what simply you would call indirect communication. So people use stories or analogies and implications to communicate. That way you can protect the honor of the person you're talking to by not saying something too directly to them. You want to avoid hurting their dignity or honor and avoid direct criticism. Sometimes if you don't have the right answer, it's for an Afghan, it's very hard to say I don't understand or I don't know, because it could cause a loss of honor. It could cause them to look weak in the same way that they might find it hard to ask for assistance in front of others because it shows weakness. And also if you're asking someone if they understand what you're talking about, could also be seen as a kind of an insult and cause embarrassment. So it's a little tricky for us to figure out ways to verify that people understand what we're talking about in indirect ways. There's a great expression someone said to me once about Afghanistan. They said, Americans have watches and Afghans have time. And this is, so we have very different structures in our society around time. Ours is a highly commodified, monetized, and society, and punctuality matters. Time is money. It's not a shared notion in Afghanistan, and that is hard for people. They view time more flexibly. So if you make an appointment and you come late, nobody, if you're 20 minutes after your appointment, they say they came at the right time, and they may think that that's close enough, and they expect to be seen. And if they can't be seen, they might get irritated and angry and cannot understand why that would have to be rescheduled. Just nearing the end of our talk, I wanted to throw a few things about domestic life in Afghanistan. Afghans are used to eating fresh food. Most village homes don't have refrigerators, and electricity is not that reliable in the urban areas either. So food is prepared fresh daily. And family style eating means sitting down on the floor, although plenty of people sit at tables, but the traditional style is sitting on the floor around a large tablecloth and sharing meals together. Hospitality, of course, is very important, and Afghans are incredibly gracious hosts. But nutrition is not a thing, and attention is not given to it. Cooking is done in large quantities, and there's nothing like specialized meals or someone who should have a low salt diet. That is a hard one, because much Afghan food is cooked with a lot of salt and a lot of oil. And sweets are eaten a lot, and sugar in their tea and things like that. So larger families particularly don't tend to their family's needs in a specific way. Smaller families, of course, give more attention and do a better job of attending to their children's needs. Preventative medical care, dental care, eye care, exercise, heart-healthy eating, mindfulness, attention to mental health issues and stress. These are all new ideas, and they'll take a while till people get the hang of it or understand how we do it here. Dental problems are rampant. Tooth infections can't, someone was telling me a story of someone with a tooth infection. They had to take their antibiotic before the doctors could operate, but they wanted to be treated immediately because treatment is immediate in Afghanistan and couldn't understand why they were being left in pain under those circumstances. So as I said, medicine is usually sought on an emergency as needed basis in Afghanistan. It's dispensed immediately. Our system of primary care physicians and testing and specialists is unfamiliar and does not make sense. In fact, Afghans often conclude that doctors here are not very good and they don't know anything, because all of this extensive testing probably means that they really just are not that knowledgeable. They may refuse tests or surgery out of fear, or they're particularly concerned about surgery, particularly about anesthesia. They don't know what these doctors are going to do to them when they're unconscious, and it's really it's really problematic, and they'll hide their illnesses for a long time because of it. One person expressed to me that he was sure that cancer enters the body by way of surgery. He can't imagine how else cancer could get in there, so it must be when you're opened up in surgery, and so he was terrified for that reason. So also having the time to get their concerns understood, especially with no records of their medical history, they feel like what happens is that their needs are often overlooked in the chaos. And trust, again, is a large concern. So I will stop here to give us a few minutes to address questions anyone has, where to start, and then we'll, oops, I'm moving back and forth. That's okay. I'll stop sharing and then we can open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
You're welcome.
Any questions, any things you've noticed with clients, things that came up from caregivers? Have any of you started seeing Afghan clients? No? They're coming soon, for sure. Yeah. I think they just passed the phase of going through their physical exams, the first physical exams, and of course, problems are popping up there. So they are coming your way for sure. Any concerns you might have, or something you heard in the presentation that spurred an idea?
I have a question. You kind of touched on family size. I'm a volunteer with the JCA in Amherst, so and my colleague, my friend Dawn here is here. So we've escorted, we've taken people to their appointments, and
I don't know what the JCA is.
oh, I'm sorry, the Jewish Community of Amherst. So we're
Okay.
volunteering to provide support through JFS for
Thank you. Okay.
for one family. And the issue came up with one of the women that I went with around the nurse practitioner feeling challenged about talking about birth control. So I wonder if you could talk about, obviously, you know, you talked about large family size and prevention not even be part of the sort of vocabulary and values, but when these women are here, what are your thoughts about discussing birth control, or how the provider might be able to, or should they bring it up?
So I will, I'm sure that Zala has more to say than I do, but I just want to bring up one point. When I was beginning to spend time with large families in Afghanistan, and I have 3 children, and everybody, the women, as soon as they could get me aside and make themselves understood to me, the first thing they wanted to know was what I did to prevent having more children, and could I bring some for them. I'll just leave it there, because even though that's a conflict between men and women, men don't have any issue with having, these big families, and for women, it is not an issue. But I'll let Zala respond more specifically to it.
Yeah, I actually, when I was at Fort Dix, for 1 month, I was at the clinic. So we had at OB actually. So I was helping the doctors and nurses there, exactly understanding how to better communicate with these patients. And we come across like probably a lot of them that with this issue. So I would say definitely discuss it. So that's not something that, it's not like a taboo thing not to even discuss, but how we want to discuss, if we involve the husband, that would be the better way to do that, because the husband is the decision maker. And that's again for families that they came from rural parts of Afghanistan. If it's from urban centers and the woman is educated, that's not an issue. Probably she has used it even in Afghanistan. There are so many organizations even now that they work on this issue. So it's not like really a new thing, even in rural parts. But of course, due to like Islamic and other cultural reasons, there are many families that they would not like this idea, especially the husbands, and they want to have as many children as they can have, and they say it's a God gift, and all those religious beliefs that So I would say that, as Rachel also pointed out, there are many women who want to stop. Like we had this patient who had 4 kids, like one after another, like literally like 1 year, even not like apart. And she was again pregnant at the base. So she came to the doctor. She was like, I don't want this, but my husband wants. So we had to figure out like what's the best way to talk with the husband and kind of talk more, like try to talk more from a like medical perspective. That's not good for the women. And also like all the other costs, that's all like of growing, like of raising a kid in US. So that's also another aspects that to just mention to them, because it's not as easy as Afghanistan, right?
People don't think about the costs in Afghanistan. They don't think that having a child is expensive or it costs anything. Here, it's very clear how much it costs, right?
But also the wrong mindset that they have, whatever, like how many kids you have, or the government here will support you, right? That's also a kind of, not all of them, but some of them, they also may have that mindset that even if I have more kids, so I'll have more like benefits, or like the government will like, support me. So more from, exactly, from like, I would be like more like involving the husband, definitely, because he will be deciding at the end. Even if you convince the women, she will go back to her husband, and she cannot do anything unless she will do it like in hiding, like kind of secretly, and that may cause more issues in future. But there are some women who are willing to do that even. Not to have more kids, and but involving the husband, and also explaining really, from medical point of view, that's not good for the health of the women, and all the responsibilities of having more children in the US. That's something that's very new to Afghans. Like let's say here, they have to take them to the doctor appointments. They have to take them even like pick up from school if there's no bus. They don't have the responsibilities in Afghanistan. So so that's something that they have to know that. Also.
Thank you. Related to that, I heard a question today about birth control and whether talking about vasectomy with the dad is something we can do, or is it off the line? Is it crossing a line talking about a vasectomy?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
So there was a question about birth control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether the volunteer can talk to the family about a vasectomy or not for the dad.
For the dad, right? So that he could, that's not a big, that's not going to go over well, I would say, or even barrier method, quite frankly, is not going to go over well either. So
if a doctor is involved, that's a different issue, because
if he tells them it's for his health,
sitting and all the like that respect that they have, the trust that they have on the doctor, that's one issue. So definitely like they have to talk. But if it's a volunteer, it again depends really like how trust the relationship is, how many, like with the husband, with the wife, not only with the wife, because in those cases then they would think that, like they're teaching, like all these Western ideas into her, like women's mind and all of that. So I think that would be where I would be more like careful, not to go that route, as in like they're already very sensitive, like our women and girls are here in US, and we don't want them to be, like more like modern, and and still all these other values. They don't lose the Islamic or the Afghan values. So they're already like have this fear, the men. So that would be, it's a sensitive issue anyways, birth control. So, but again, it really depends, one has to be like calculate the situation and like the relationship, and maybe just go and talk with both of them, and yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, Jean.
We've had, there are 4 children in the family and the 2 adults. And we have had, I can't tell you how many doctor's appointments. Oh my God. One thing that's been very helpful is the translating machine, because then especially the mom can talk directly to somebody who speaks Persian and get answers. We're having a little more trouble with the dentist issues. We can get them in to see a dentist, but I'm not, one of them has a toothache, but they're not sure they really want to go. And so any suggestions on, on interactions with doctors like that?
I'm going to leave it to Zala because you have more experience about that.
You mean the children, they don't want to go to
Or
the
anybody, for the parent, anybody with dental pain, of course they're afraid, so.
Yeah, I think the thing is, as Rachel said, also dental care is not something common in Afghanistan. Like,
Yeah,
honestly,
I
if
hear
you
you.
have pain and you want to go, and at that stage, they will mostly like pull out your teeth. For children, they're definitely scared. They haven't, like, as a child, they haven't been through that process of like seeing a dentist, so it becomes okay. Like, my son is 4 years old and he's been seeing a dentist since age 2, so it's
Sure.
okay for him, compared to, like, I was always afraid of dentists. The only issue I have in my life health wise is my teeth. So, and I grew up in Pakistan, I didn't like to go to a dentist because I didn't think, it's again goes to dental care, how important is it, the preventive care. So they don't understand that. So probably more orientation, or like all of, I don't know, but yeah, I think that I'm just explaining the reason that they don't want to go, is either like they're afraid, or it's not that important for them, or they don't have that much pain, like, of course, if they have that extreme pain, they would go.
Then they're going to go.
Yeah. So, but to avoid that pain or further damage, they don't go because they have never done this in their life, to just go and prevent something from happening.
The other issue we've had is with immunizations. The school requires, oh my God, I mean, and the poor kids have been to the doctor so many times to get immunizations, and the parents have been very good about it. But I can't believe how many shots they've had to have. So that's been
Right.
something
And I
too.
would recommend, actually, if you can, because this is what Sanam recommended to me, is they may not keep good track of that, but if you're helping a family, if you could keep track of their records, that would be great. Yeah, okay.
Well, and if it's in Massachusetts, there's an immunization registry. So that's good.
Okay.
Also, one of the reasons, I mean, you probably know this, that there's so many is because it's a whole catch-up series. So, over about 6 months, they should be good. But yeah, it's a lot.
Even in some cases, they have done those shots in Afghanistan, because it's common in Afghanistan, and all these organizations, they do that for free. But the problem is they don't have any document to show here that, my child had this shot. So they have to redo it.
I have a question. I'm just wondering whether the women are so private that if they see we have just as many female doctors for all types of regimen in the United States. So OGBYN, for instance, of a male doctor. So what do you see about, I mean, we go in and we put on a smock and we get tested and we get x-rays. We can do just about, we're so used to. And the second part is that the children, when we hit 8th grade, what happens is that we declothe. We change our clothes to sports. We go into locker rooms and we put on suckers or uniforms and things like that for the regimen of games. So that's very Americanized to be in a locker room coming with the same folks, male, female, doesn't matter in terms of that regimen. This is that's our normal culture that we do that, which is they're so private. So I just wonder what they'd be facing when they hit that, seventh, eighth grade. Eighth grade is pretty much when we start playing serious soccer or playing sports.
So let me just clarify, because it's been a long time since my kids were in school. Boys and girls share the same locker room now?
Not saying that. I'm saying that you declothe, you change your clothes from school clothes to.
But single gender, not boys
Yeah,
and
single
girls.
gender. But I'm saying
Okay,
if you're
okay.
not used to declothing in front of other than your family, how's that, going to, will it affect the kids or not? I don't know. I'm just.
I think
pose a question.
more girls than boys, I think, because girls are really taught to be extremely modest. I remember when I was in high school, half the girls would go into the bathroom stalls to change because they didn't want to change in front of anybody else. But I think that Rosala's back. She's definitely more expert on this than I am, but yeah, she hasn't had put kids in school yet. And so we'll see.
Yeah, well, I think the first part, which was the female or male doctor, that's definitely an issue. I mean, we heard from Sanam, they have a daycare in California, and they're dealing with a lot of Afghan families who came recently or the last 2-3 years. They never want to see a male doctor, definitely. But again, I don't want to generalize this issue for a family who came from more progressive, or they are progressive, or they came from city. It's fine, because even in Kabul, people go and see male doctors for different issues. Maybe not OB that much. For school, I don't know really much. I don't have much experience, but I have a niece who is 16. Her father is very, very, very conservative. I don't think so. She might be in any sports even, so they may just avoid, attending any kind of, sports or exercises that would require to share a locker room, or they would hide from their families. If they're very interested and they like it. I've heard a lot of stories in the past that they do that. They don't share everything with their family, that what they do in the school.
But they also,
I know at least my brother-in-law that he would never want his daughter, to share a locker room or be in contact with any guy in any way. So that's the extreme case, which he is. But I'm sure many like him who came recently, they have that mindset, and they're very, very much protective of their girls. They may not be that much in Afghanistan. They're even more here because they have that fear,
Right. And so there's so that after school activities is not that much engaged in with a lot of these kids. And so socialization is not as much engaged in, which is the way the parents, the fathers in particular, want it. Some of these girls are engaged when they're born or from a very young age. So there's certainly no dating. So there's a lot of things that they're excluded from because of the way their parents want it to be. We are out of time, sorry.
I was gonna say,
grandchild in the other room.
Yeah, we'll close it off here. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Zala, and thank you all who attended. I'd love to see you next week for the Q&A. We'll have a lot more time. Sleep on this information, bring your questions next week, and I think it will be great. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your week. Bye.